Go for No, the sequel is an interesting story, first off, in and of itself. We first wrote Go for No, the very first rough draft in 1999. We published it in 2000. And for a couple of years, we kind of played around, with trying to find a big publisher, and all that fell apart. And it finally was in 2010. So we're like at the 10-year mark. I started thinking we should write a sequel. It's 10 years. Doesn't that sound good? 10 years later, here's the sequel. And right at that moment, Go for No took off. I mean, it was the 10-year overnight success.
That's right.
That
was
it was December of 2010.
Finally.
It hit #1 on Amazon in all of the
10 years of very painful.
10 years of a lot of marketing and mailing copies and all of the stuff that you'd expect. And it's not like we weren't making money. We were, but the book hadn't really reached its audience yet.
Yeah.
And we got so busy with the business that we got from the book that we didn't have time to write the sequel. And suddenly it's 11th year and 12th year and 13th. I'm thinking the 12th anniversary, the 13th anniversary. No, we're not going to do a 13th anniversary. We'll wait for 15. Well, 15 came and went. And then it got to 20 years. I went, oh my.
We were going to do it at 20. Yeah.
20. That's the number, the 20-year anniversary. And I can't even tell you what we got waylaid into.
No, I know why, because we couldn't figure out what to do.
Oh, it's funny. I forgot. Yeah, we couldn't wrap our brains around what the story would be.
Yeah.
And so finally, as we approached the 25th anniversary of the publication of the book, it became very obvious what the sequel should be about. And this is kind of what we don't talk about this in the book, but we call it the hamburger theory. And if you think of sales, and if you think of Go for No in particular, the meat of any sales training program, we're talking how to greet and approach, how to present your features and benefits, how to manage objections, trial closes, getting referrals, all of that, the whole stuff. That's the meat of what any company, when they sell you sales training, whether it's 5 steps, 7 steps, 10 steps, it's going to be pretty much the same basic track that covers that stuff. And when we wrote Go for No, what we discovered was that a lot of people who would take any form of sales training would reach the end of that sales training program. It didn't matter who it was, Sandler, it didn't matter who it was. There was a large percentage of people who still couldn't implement it. And the reason was they had a fear of failure and rejection. So it didn't matter how much they learned in terms of the techniques and the secret closes and all of this stuff. They weren't making the calls. They weren't reaching out. They were not willing to hear the word no. So Go for No kind of filled that part of the market. And we refer to that as the top bun. It's the bun on the top of the burger. It's this piece where people are just not willing to fail and be rejected. But then we realized after all of those years, and it should have been very obvious to us sooner, that there was a bottom bun. There was a bottom piece to it. And we discovered it because people would walk up to us when we would do a workshop, and they would say like, oh yeah, Go for No, I never thought of it that way. This is a brilliant idea. I just increased my failure rate. Thanks. And they would go out and do it. And then there was a group of people who would say, oh my gosh, Go for No, that's a brilliant strategy. I just need to increase my failure rate. And they wouldn't do it. So the question is, even when you give people the knowledge, the information, the strategy, if you will, some people would take the strategy, 10, 15, 20%, and they would run with it and do very well. But the bulk of the people were still hung up. Even though they knew it, they still wouldn't do it. And so we asked ourselves, what does it come down to? What is the problem? And the problem is a lack of self-esteem, a lack of believing that you're good enough to call on anybody, that you're worthy of success, that you deserve to take someone's time telling them about your product or your service. This whole thing of I'm worthy, I deserve your attention, and I deserve to have you say yes to me. That was the thing that we realized we had missed. And so the sequel became really the answer to that. We wrote the sequel, which is 25 years later from the Go for No book. And our main star now is Cassidy Bratton. She's the 22-year-old daughter of Eric in the first book, and she has just graduated USC, and she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life. And her father, Eric, puts her on the phone making sales calls. And she is fundamentally me. I mean, this was my experience. She has to go back to her father and say, I don't know how to do this. I'm bad at this. I will never be good at sales. I will never be good at this. And then he says the magic phrase, which is really what the theme of the book is. He says, then don't be you. And she looks at him like, are you nuts? What do you mean, don't be me? He says, Cassidy, you have decided that you can't do it. You have decided already that you're not worthy, that you don't have the skills or the talent, that it's never going to happen for you. You, sitting here in front of me right now, can't do it. So don't be you. Be someone who can. And at first, she thinks that it's still kind of a crazy idea. But then it starts to percolate in her brain. And she starts thinking, well, what would a person who could do it do? What would their attributes be? What skills would they have? What stumbling blocks would they get themselves past? And she goes on a little group of self-discovery, of personal development, if you will. And finally, at the end, she decides to become the person that she never thought she could be. And that really is what we realize is the piece that was missing from Go for It all along, is that the strategy in and of itself is not enough. You all know this. You're all on this call. You've all, after Go for No, at least went, oh yeah, I just have to increase my failure rate.
And it works.
And it works. And it works. But it's worked for people like you who are applying it and showing up. They say 80% of success is showing up. Well, you're showing up. The rest of the people are too scared to show up, or they don't think that they're ever going to be successful. They have this psychological lack of self-esteem roadblock that is holding them back. And that's really what the sequel is about.